we're gonna separate the two groups. The first group, we're gonna go on our wagon ride first, and the second group is gonna go into the building behind me and learn the process of the sap to syrup. Out in the forest, we're gonna be learning about how we collect the sap and how we take care of the forest. Okay? So in the first group, if you wanna follow us to the wagon, and the second group will have all about what happens in this room. So head on in.
So we have to go in.
Okay.
Everyone's got a spoon? Alright, we'll need them in a sec. Okay, so in here is how we make maple syrup. So while the trees are out there making the sap, this is what turns it into maple syrup. This is our evaporator. So in our evaporator, it's what turns our sap, which comes from the trees and looks like this. It's only 2% sugar and about 98% water. And it takes 40 liters of sap to make 1 liter of syrup. So as the buckets up here show, those 5 buckets hold just over 8 liters each. You need all of them to make that one little bottle up there in the corner. And that's 1 liter. This machine behind me, we run from anywhere for 6 to 8 hours a day during peak season. And we would get maple syrup out of this guy every 15 minutes. So it's going pretty fast. It runs through a process before it comes here, the sap does, called reverse osmosis. So we take out about 50% of the water, which makes this process much faster for us. So sap to syrup in here is about an hour. We run our machine wood fired. So normally in here, I would have a lot of wood. It would be burned. We would put wood in every 8 minutes. We would not keep these doors open except to add more. And that's what maintains our production on top in these guys here. Once the sap has turned into syrup, it comes out looking a bit like this, so it's a bit cloudy, like that. That's just a byproduct of being boiled. It's just all those minerals and things like that. So the next process for us is to run it through our filter press, which is this guy here. The filter press is a combination of these filter papers, which looks like this, and some diatomaceous earth, which is a filter powder. The powder collects in between these papers in here like this. So the papers are on either side, and what builds up on the inside is simply the powder mixed with any of those cloudy sediment type things on the inside. So it ends up like a brick at the end of the day, and we just use them for composting and fertilizer and things like that. And then what comes out of the filter press looks like this guy. So it's what you'd expect when you get from the grocery store. It's what you expect when you buy from our store. And that is the final product. So maple syrup is 67% sugar. That's why it takes 40 liters of sap to make 1 liter. So that 67 is boiled out just from water. It's how we end up with our final product. If we keep going from that, we then make other things we make here, such as, if we keep going all the way, we've got sugar. And if we go about 70%, but we haven't turned it into anything else, you get little sugar crystals in the bottom, like this guy. And that's simply because there's not enough water to hold the sugar apart, and the sugar crystals clump together. So after it's come through this process, it's filtered, it's pure syrup. We then put it in these drums here. These drums, they're packaged hot, so it's like canning. So it's about 140 liters of syrup goes in here. We can make up to 2 to 3 of these a day. On a really good day for us. So that happens, they're sealed and they're put in our cold storage. Once the boiling season is over for us, we bring these barrels back, and in order to bottle it, we need to reheat it. So that's what this little guy's here for. And this is pretty much like our reheater. So it gets heated up in here again. It gets filtered again, just to make sure that all the impurities and minerals are left out of it. That we don't want, and then it's bottled in our big machine, that blue thing over there, and it gets hot pumped over there, and then the guys bottle it from over there. So there's 4 different types of syrup that we can create here during our season. The beginning is golden, and that's for us the end of February, and then the end of the season is very dark, And if we've had a really great season, for us that's the end of March. So for us it's about 4 to 6 weeks of collecting and boiling, and we get those 4 different types of flavor intensities, I guess is a great way to describe it. So they are golden, amber, dark, and berry dark. The difference in those is simply the time they're collected. So at the beginning of the season, it's the trees are just waking up from winter, they're just getting ready to start their processes. And then at the end of the season, it's right before the trees bud, and they're already ready for spring. So the enzymes in the trees are what changes the flavor of the syrup. And we're going to try all the syrups now so you guys get an understanding of how that changes quite dramatic. So we're going to start with golden. So this one we make our sugar candies with. We make the taffy on snow that you'll have out there with. You'll notice this one gets darker in color as well as in taste. And that is simply those trees changing as they're moving towards spring. Alright, so that one does have a bit of a stronger maple taste or a bit of a molasses taste coming through. And then the last one we have is called Very Dark. This is a strong flavor. It is an acquired taste on pancakes and things like that, but we recommend it for baking and cooking. So if you guys are in the store and you are trying the kettle corn or the maple beans, the butter tarts or the muffins, we're using this guy because once you add it to other ingredients, the flavor mellows out quite quickly and you're just left with that great maple flavor. If you're cooking at home with salmon or chicken and things like that, it's really great as well. Just that flavor change? Yeah. So we here on the farm make all 4 and we sell all 4. In the store you're probably only going to ever find amber, but because we are a farm and we can do it, we do make all 4 available, and we have people who come in and only buy the Very Dark and they travel just to get it. And we have people who only buy the golden and that's their favorite. So it's all about personal choice. And yeah, it's pretty awesome. The trees make all of it. Did anyone have any questions?
Do you price the 4 different kinds differently because of the taste?
We don't. It's the same processing. It's the same bottling process. It's the same everything for us, except we may only get a little bit of golden and we may only get a little bit of Very Dark, depending on how fast the season starts and how fast the season ends. That would be the only difference, but we don't price differently, because if someone loves the Very Dark, they shouldn't have to pay more for it. But there are some farms that do charge extra for it because it is more of a rarer flavor. Yeah. Anyone else?
So you just get the products from the spring, right?
From the trees?
Yes.
Yes.
And how about productivity? How much maple tree enough for you?
So we have 4,000 taps in trees at the moment. So, but we have more than that of maple trees out there. They're just not big enough to tap yet. So the tapping process happens the end of usually January. And the guys go out, they tap the tree, so they put the spile in the tree. So they drill a hole, put the spile in, attach the tubing, and we use tubes instead of buckets here because we have 4,000. And so that kind of process can take a couple of days to get it all in there. And then the cleanup at the end is we take the spiles out, we clean the tubes, and we leave them out of the trees for the next year. So the trees have time to heal and also just replenish themselves. But we only take less than 5-10% of the sap that the tree's producing. So they're still running fine. They're still good. Any other questions? Yep.
So I'm just wondering, so basically there's 4 types of syrup, or this farm only produce 4 types?
There's only 4 types, yeah. So that the names for those are international. So between the US and Canada, they made together international naming for the syrup. So that way, if you go to any farm across any of the borders, you'll find the same things. And that's simply because the names have changed quite a few times. And some people kept the old names and some people kept changing them to keep up with the new ones. So those four are the four that the trees make. And in terms of the other, like if someone has a lot of amber and things like that, it may be that that's all they can produce. Because there are people further north who don't produce golden at all.
But so basically it's come from the same tree, it's just different time than it's...
Yeah, so it's all like a variety of different maple trees. So we have, they're all natural out there. We don't plant any of them. They're just reseeding. They take care of themselves. So all the trees that are out there, we just collect from all the ones that are big enough to produce maple syrup from. And you'll learn about size once you're out there.
And how about the age of the tree?
The age of the tree is the same as, like, it has to be so many years old to be so many like centimeters around, and that's how you work out if it's big enough to tap.
So
I think it's like 40 years.
40 years?
Yeah. So it's like 80 centimeters or something in diameter. Yeah.
You have to wait 40 years in order to like collect.
Yeah. So your tree has to be big enough.
The sugar content in those four are they the same?
The sugar content, yeah. So at final stage, they're all 67% sugar. And legally, maple syrup has to be above 65 to be considered maple syrup. We find 67 works really well for us, especially because we make so many other products using our syrup. But yeah, but all the trees across all different types of maple all start, about 2% sugar, and it can be less than that, and we just have to like test it, which is what we do in here during boiling season. So we check sugar content like a diabetic would check their blood sugars. We have a little sugar reader that does that for us, and that way we can work out what we're gonna like have to boil this at, and approximately how much time it will spend in there and things like that. So that's Murray and Richard, who you'll meet out on your tours. They're the scientists behind it. But in the final stage, we also, once it comes out, the guys test it with a refractometer to test the sugar content again. And they also, to tell what type of like flavor intensity, so like golden or amber and things like that, they use a spectrometer to tell how much light passes through the syrup, and that's how you can tell which one it is. Because sometimes to the naked eye, it looks amber, but based on the percentage of light that travels through, it's actually still golden. So we use that machine to make sure that we're on top of what we're producing.
All right, so in terms of the refractometers, I know in white is around 19 to 24 degrees. So for the maple syrup, usually if we want to use the refractometer to measure sugar content, usually between how many degrees?
So we measure here with the refractometer as soon as it comes out of the machine.
Okay.
So it's coming out at about 220 something degrees Fahrenheit.
Oh.
So 108 to 110 degrees Celsius. That measurement is based on, so it's just here normally. So if we were boiling today, this is the temperature we would want to reach. So 221.27 degrees Fahrenheit. And that temperature is made up of the barometric pressure of the day, as well as the extra degrees you need to boil sugar at. So that is a bit of a science just to figure out what temperature you need it to come out at. So as soon as it comes out, it gets poured, it goes into a bucket kind of thing. And then once the bucket's about half full and we're just about to filter it, then we test it. So it has dropped a little bit in temperature.
Yeah, I know
but
that.
not much.
Not much.
It's still sitting at about 190 degrees Fahrenheit.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So in terms of the sugar content, how much sugar content do you think is contained each drop of maple syrup?
Is dropped off?
I mean, so usually when I used to work in a winery, they talk about refractometer to use that to measure sugar content.
Yeah.
So we usually get one drop of grape juice, put it on top of the refractometer to measure sugar content. So the scale is between 19 to 24 degrees to reach the VQA standard. And then I'm just wondering, just curious. So what is the if I just get one drop of maple syrup, put it on top of refractometer to measure sugar content. So like, what is the number range gonna be? What is the sugar
That
scale?
is something you'll have to ask Murray and Richard.
All right.
They're the end stage. So
Alright.
yeah, they're the ones who are doing the science behind it, checking the syrups, checking the saps, checking the lines.
Okay.
So your tour guide, I think will be Richard.
Mhm.
So yeah, he'll be able to give you those kind of answers.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
And the farm belongs to government or private sector? Like all
The government's,
trees?
the farm's family owned. So this is now 4th generation family owned farm.
So they grow up the tree and on the land.
Well, the trees naturally were here. They were just here. Yeah. So the trees, I believe, came in about, just naturally appeared in the early 1900s. And then the farm was bought in, I think, the 1920s or the 1930s. And it was a dairy farm originally, which is why we have some buildings we don't use anymore. And then they just started doing maple syrup as a hobby. And then about 25, 30 years ago, maple syrup changed from being a hobby into something they looked at into doing a business, and now it runs the whole farm. So, yeah. Amazing. So Murray and Richard, who are your tour guides, are the owners. So they're the ones who, run everything pretty much.
So seeing you just let the tree automatically grow up like that, but there's nothing to heal it after?
The tree naturally heals itself. So it literally, like, when we pull the spile out, it heals over almost like if you'd fallen over and scratched your knee. So it just
You need the
heals
big
its-
time for them?
Yeah, we give them, well, they get
Oh, no.
10 months. They get, 10, 11 months to heal themselves, but they can do it much faster than that. By the end of summer, they're all good.
We're going to see all that in the forest.
There we go.
Tourism costs you're taking? I'll touch a little bit on the history of our operation and how we got into the tourism and how we evolved, rather than just on the maple production of it. So I'm the 3rd generation here. We've been here on this farm 80 years. Richard, that's doing the other tours, the 4th generation. I grew up here, we were a dairy farm and grapes. And then 25 years ago, we got into maple syrup just kind of as a hobby. We had this forest here, and we started to utilize it for sap production. And it just kind of spun off from there, and we're a full-time maple and tourism operation right now. We no longer have dairy cattle or grapes, and one of our family members works the land as corn, soybeans, wheat, and hay. All the little buildings you see, we just finished up our spring tours. That's called the Maple Trek, and we do schools and public, and we do the history of maple syrup, right from the natives here to present day. And we just had about 10,000 people through in the last month, about 4,000 school kids. So we're just kind of winding down from that, and now we switch over in the summer months. We do a Discover Maple tour, and it's more the modern day management of the forest, how we collect the sap, and just the whole ecosystem out here. Okay, so we'll go for 90% sugar maples, and there's a lot of other kinds of trees. There's about a dozen different types of trees in this forest. There's a lot of different maple trees. There's probably 100 different species of maple, but the sugar maple is the most desirable for collecting sap out of because it has the sweetest sap and it gives the most sap. So what happens is in the summer when the leaves are on the tree is producing sugar through the leaves and pulling moisture out of the ground and minerals to get itself to grow. In the fall, the leaves fall off. The sugar that's remaining in the tree is the life to keep the tree alive in the winter. The sugar converts to starch when it gets cold, and it sits there and keeps that tree alive for the winter. And then in mid-February around here, when it just starts to get above freezing through the day, the tree starts to pull moisture out of the ground and push it up to the branches to feed the buds, to get it ready for the growing season. And when it's doing that, it's mixing with the starch, converting it back to sugar because now the weather's warming up and the days are getting longer. and it puts pressure just under the bark on the tree, which enables us to get the sap out of the tree. But the key thing for maple production is above freezing through the day, below freezing at night. Because if it stays warm for a number of days, the sap just stays up in the branches. There's no more pressure here because the sap's already up there. So we need it to freeze at night to get that sap back down into the ground. And then when it comes down, it puts a little pressure and we'll collect it on the way down. So it's that up and down motion of the sap because of the warm and cold temperatures that gives us the sap. So we do get that for about 6 weeks in the spring. It's usually mid-February to the end of March. We finished up on Good Friday here. So out of that 6 weeks, we'd get about 20 of those cycles, which would give us our season. If we can get 20 good freezing and nights and warm days, we'll have our sap season. So out of one tree, out of one hole in a tree, we would get about 60 liters of sap on an average year, which would give us 1.5 liters of syrup. Depending on the size of the tree, we can put more in one hole, and we'll touch on that a little farther down. So here we had a bucket on this tree. We had put this spile in. This is an old style spile, and we hung a bucket here for demonstration. And this was stuck in here, and there's a little hole in this, and then the sap comes in here and drips in the bucket. And you can see when we pulled this out yesterday, we just removed the bucket yesterday, there's a little bit of sap running down the side of the tree yet. And the tree will naturally start to get kind of a gel around there, and it'll heal up. So you can see some of the old holes in this tree. There's one there, one here. So by the end of this year, if it's a good growing season, this hole will be completely closed up. So then next year we come out and we drill a new hole away from that one. And we just keep working our way around the tree, and we can do this for 100 years or more on a tree. The tapping will not kill it, as long as we do this sustainably. Okay?
So,
Yes?
are there any other way that the others do it? Like you're saying that you do it sustainably.
Yes.
does the other
There
one
is very few that will harm a maple tree. It's maple syrup. Most maple syrup producers are very responsible. The forest here is a natural forest. We didn't plant any of these trees. It's been here hundreds of years, and we want to try and preserve it for the future.
So, and then do you plant more of them? Or
No, they all plant themselves. All the little seedlings you see coming have come from the seeds from these trees. So we don't plant. If a tree is dying, like you'll see a tree behind you, the top is starting to die on it, we will remove this tree this summer, and we'll use that for firewood for making our maple syrup. So everything gets used. If it's a large tree, we can even get some lumber out of it. We'll cut lumber and make boards out of it. All these hoses connect from tree to tree. We have about 60 kilometers of tubing set up in our forest. So all these smaller lines are all sloped towards a larger line there, which is called the main line. And so this flows through these hoses down the hill to the road. There's a large tank at the road. It all runs into one tank. So this whole forest runs into one tank. And then we have a tanker truck. We pump it onto that and bring it back to the farm to process.
So does it ever get like frozen?
Yes, the ideal maple syrup weather is when we get really cold nights and warmed up through the day. So there'll be sap in these, and they'll freeze solid. But it's very flexible. It's made just for maple syrup, this tubing. It's a fruit grade tubing, very flexible. If we get a tree branch that falls on it, it'll push it right to the ground. We can cut the branch off and just pick it up. We also get some animals that like to chew on it or knock it down. The deer like to chew on it, the squirrels. So during our maple syrup season, we're constantly having somebody walk the forest and look for damage and repairing
Do you
it.
have deer?
The deer, there's a lot of deer in here. We have a provincial park next door, and the deer live in there, and they come here to eat. But the squirrels are little buggers, because if they chew a hole in the line in the springtime when there's sap in there, they taste that it's sweet, and then they don't leave it alone. So always around a certain area in the forest, you'll know where the squirrels are, and almost every day you have to fix a line there, because they like to chew it. So this, like sap, has bacteria in it, and it has sugar, so it will spoil. So we have to try and collect the sap immediately after we get it in the tank and cook it. And at the end of the season, these lines stay up here all year round, okay? All we do is unplug them from the tree, the way we pulled this out of the tree. Unplug them from the tree, but we put a little bit of isopropic alcohol, which is the alcohol you use in the medical world. Put a little bit in the line, plug the line into here so it's all sealed, and that alcohol sits there all summer, keeps any bacteria from growing in here. Otherwise the lines would be all mold and mildew. And then the next season when we come out, we drill the holes. The first sap for a few days, we'll just let it run on the ground and that'll flush all the alcohol out of it. Yeah, very important to keep it sanitized. This tubing is around 10 years old and it looks just like new yet because we keep it clean. If we would have had a really warm spell, like normally now we'll start seeing some green plants coming up in the forest and it'll be getting warmer, and we haven't removed these from the trees yet, we'll start to see some white like sludge in here because the sap is starting to go bad in the tubing, but the alcohol will clean that up. It's been an extremely cold spring. Our crop this year could have been better. It got very warm in February, and what it did then is it affected the trees to have a little bit of bacteria grow right at the hole, and it slowed this production down for March. We can't come and re-drill holes once they start to heal up. So what happens is the hole actually started to heal up a little bit in February. So March, even though we had ideal weather for sap, it wasn't running real great because we had a bit of biofilm build up and start to heal the tree. So we finished around normal time even though it was still cold nights and warm days. But normally we know when our season is finished, when the bud starts to swell open on the tree, then the whole enzymes in the tree change and it gives the syrup a really bad flavor. So that's when we normally quit. As soon as we start to hear the frogs in the ponds in the spring, we know it's the maple season's over because the trees are starting to bud. Okay? Comes here and shows everybody how to tap trees now. So we do use a battery-powered drill to drill the hole, and it's quite simple. It would take us 3 people about 4 days to do the 4,000 holes that we do. Sometimes we're in snowshoes when we do this. This year we had about 1.5 feet of snow in here, so we were in snowshoes. So when we come into a forest that we've never tapped, we need to know what size tree we can tap and how many holes we can put in it. So what we would do, we have a rule of thumb here. So a tree that would be 80 centimeters in circumference would take 1 tap, 110 up to 140 would be 2 taps. So we'd take the string, wrap it around the tree, and then we'd know whether we can tap this tree. So this tree is only 60 centimeters in circumference, so it's too small to tap. If we did tap this tree, we would get sap and we would get sugar, but it wouldn't be sustainable for the tree. We would kill the tree because we'd be taking too much sugar. We're only taking about 10 to 15% of the sugar maximum out of the tree because it needs the rest of that sugar to get itself growing for the year. So some trees can take up to 4 taps. If we have a tree that is 190 in circumference, we can get 4 taps, which means that we can get up to 6 liters of syrup out of that tree. There's only 1 tree in this whole forest that is large enough for that. This is a fairly young forest. In 1900, before my grandfather came here, this forest was almost all sweet American chestnut. A blight came in from Europe, killed all the chestnut trees on the east coast, and this forest was pretty much bare then, and maples took over since then. So the oldest maple tree in here might be about 120 years old. My grandfather and my father did tap some trees here in the 1950s, but there wasn't a lot of big maples then because they were only like 30 years old then. A maple tree is usually about 40 years old in the forest before we tap it. This probably is around 20 years old, this tree. So we try to make a few pockets for light to come in, for the young trees to take off, and the other trees to get bigger branches. But 3 years ago, we took all the ash trees out of here. We took 800 trees out of here because the emerald ash borer came in and killed all the ash trees. So we utilized them for lumber and for firewood. And that opened up the forest a lot. In some areas, it opened up too much. You start to see a bit of raspberries coming here. You can see there was 3 ash trees there, and it made a big opening. So a little bit bigger opening than we'd like, but we didn't have much choice because these trees were dead. We try not to open the forest up too much because then it opens up potential for invasive species coming in. Like we have garlic mustard, and we have flowering dogwood that'll come in, and they're not native to the area, and they will actually keep seedlings from germinating because they're so invasive. So we don't like to see this, but these are native to the area, these raspberries. So young trees will start to germinate under there, and eventually this will close in and the raspberries will die off because they don't have enough light. So it's all a natural cycle. We try to let the cycle be as natural as possible. Here, this is called a sap ladder. I'll explain this. There's a tank at the road. We have a pump house with electricity, and we have vacuum. We have a vacuum pump running, and we're sucking on the lines. We can get about 100% more sap on the average year. Like we can double our yield by having vacuum, because on those days when it's just iffy whether the temperature's just right or it's a cloudy day like today, the vacuum will kind of change the pressure around the tree and help coax the sap out. And it also, because we have so much tubing, it helps move that sap through the tubing. So then there's a large tank there, and then we bring the truck to collect it. So what we have is you'll see over here, we have a black line and the blue lines. The black line carries just vacuum up to the forest. Our pump is about 2,000 feet away from here. So if we just used the blue line, it would be full of liquid. We wouldn't get vacuum up here to the bush. So, and the trees do put out some gases. As they're pushing out sap, they're also putting out a lot of gases. So the gas will go up into the black line, go down the pump, and the bottom line is just for liquid. And it keeps our vacuum much higher here, which gives us a better yield. Vacuum's great, keeps our sap fresher because it moves it through the lines quicker and doesn't spoil as fast. Gives us a better yield, and we can lift it uphill with vacuum. This is called a sap ladder. We have a trail here we didn't want to block, so we brought our line high and then dropped it and then sucked it up into that line. So this here, we use all the small lines, so it's like sucking through a straw rather than sucking through a large hose. So when the sap's running, you can actually see there's sap in these. Those lines are shaking, and there's air and sap coming up through them, because the trees do put out a lot of gases when they are producing sap. A tree can actually, if we were to put a gauge on a tree, when the sap's running good, it'll push as much as 45 psi at that tree. So that's a lot of pressure. You can blow 45 psi.
Do you do anything with the gas?
No, it just goes to the pump and gets expelled. Yeah, it's just like carbon dioxide, oxygen, anything that the tree, because it has gases to help move that sap up the tree. It's the gases that help move the sap up the tree. So, one thing about vacuum, if we're moving sap through the lines and we have vacuum, it's putting a little bit of vacuum at the tree. If for any reason while the sap's running our power fails or our pump shuts off, the tree will actually suck a little bit of that sap back into itself and get that bacteria in there and start to heal the hole up. So every one of these files we put in the tree has a little one-way valve so that the tree can push sap out, but the sap can't come back into the tree. There's a little ball in here. And that's just a fail-safe in case the power goes out. As long as it's not freezing, we keep our pump running constantly. We don't turn our vacuum pumps off until it freezes solid. That way we don't get a problem with the bacteria coming back into the tree. Like when you were back at the Sugar Shack, Tegan was explaining the different colors of maple syrup and how they come about. So what actually causes the colors of the maple syrup to change is the bacteria in the sap. It's like having a stronger cheese or having a wine that's fermented more. So when the weather's cold, there's hardly any bacteria coming out of the tree because the tree is actually putting bacteria out. There's hardly any bacteria building up in our lines. So then when we boil the sap, it caramelizes different. But as the weather starts to warm up and the sap starts to get more bacteria, then it makes the sap caramelize different and have a different flavor. There's 3 sugars in sap. There's fructose, glucose, and sucrose. And what the bacteria does, it feeds on a certain one of those simple sugars and converts it to another. So now our ratios are different. So in really fresh sap, your ratio will be different than in sap that's had bacteria working on it, which makes it caramelize different in the evaporator and gives it a different flavor. It's all there's a lot of studies going in the maple syrup industry. There's a lot of money being pumped in. The maple syrup industry in Canada is a $1 billion industry. Quebec is the large producer. They produce 80% of the world's maple syrup. Ontario is only around 3%. So there's lots of room to grow in Ontario. Ontario actually has more maple trees than Quebec, but the industry hasn't gone that way in Ontario. We have more other industries and businesses. Quebec is more of an agricultural province, and I think their government over the years has pumped some money into the maple industry to help it grow. So huge operations in Quebec. But most of the syrup that's being produced in Quebec is just being sold in stainless steel barrels like you saw in our sugar shack and going to packers and being shipped all over the world, or even into Ontario, because Ontario doesn't produce near as much as what they sell.
Are there any other countries producing maple syrup? Maybe
No,
in Europe?
just Canada, United States. That's the thing that keeps maple syrup in demand and keeps the price where it is that it's only produced on this northeastern seaboard of Canada and United States. So there's, in Canada, it's just Ontario, Quebec, and New Brunswick, a little bit New Brunswick. And then United States, it's Maine, Vermont, New York, a little bit in Wisconsin, and that's about it. And so far they haven't figured out how to mimic maple syrup as an artificial. They can come up with artificial flavors, but if you know maple syrup, you'll know if it's an artificial flavor or a real flavor. It's just totally different.
There's no way the industry will lose its charm, just like wine.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. So it's a very growing industry, very positive. So I tell people that we started out 25 years ago as a hobby with maple syrup, and I ruined a perfectly good hobby and turned it into a business. But we love it. It's great. There's lots of room. We belong to the Ontario Maple Syrup Producers Association and International Maple Syrup Producers Association. We get all kinds of newsletters with all the research that's being done. We have the Ontario Syrup Producers. We go somewhere different every year in Ontario in the summer and have seminars, and we visit different sugar operations, and everyone's very willing to share, especially in Ontario, because there's so much room to grow. There's no one really feeling like they're threatened by other producers. So it's a great industry.
Do you belong to any tourism organizations?
We are with the St. Catharines Tourism Association. We're members of that.
So, how do you control the number of people? Has there been a situation where you've had a lot of people, and that's where you learned that maybe for
yes,
this place
we did.
can't-
She's asking how do we control so that we can handle the people. We've tried a lot of things over the years. We were running a pancake house, and we did get a lot of people, and a lot of people were just coming for pancakes, not doing the tour, not buying much in the store. When we were running the pancake house, we had to hire 60 people between the tourism and the pancake house just for 6 weeks every year because it was seasonal. By the time we recruited all those people, trained them, we found it wasn't viable running the restaurant. So we took a step back. We did the restaurant for 20 years. We took a step back. It was a hard decision. And then we just started producing syrup and doing this tour here. And now our tour is scheduled every half hour. There's only room for so many people on a tour. And this year there was a few days we turned away a number of people because there wasn't room, but now it's manageable. We found it just wasn't manageable before. We were bringing in a lot of money in a short time, but we couldn't control our expenses. Labor was high, everything was, it was just crazy. We would get 1,500 people a day out, but it just wasn't manageable. So now we're doing maximum 400 people a day on the tour, and we know we have a set labor cost or set amount of people that can handle those, and we find we're making more money at the end than when we were bringing 1,000 people out. It was a hard decision because we were very popular, and there was people very upset when we closed the restaurant because they wanted to come out for pancakes. But you got to do what works for financially. Yeah, if you can't make money on it, that's not a lot of sense doing it. We have to make a living on it.
So
Yeah.
how many people do work here?
Right now we have, in the springtime, and we just laid everyone off last week, we had around 15 people, but we used to have about 60.
60.
Yeah, and then year-round we have around 7 people because we make a lot of value-added products, and we pack our syrup. We do an online store. We have the store at the farm open year-round, and we just opened a store at the Falls View Casino before Christmas. Niagara Falls at the casino, we opened a retail store there, so we're trying to hit that tourism market a bit. So that was a new venture for us to open that store. Yeah, it's a totally different market there than at the farm. At the farm we get the people, mostly people that are locals, and they'll buy larger jugs of syrup, but at the Falls we're finding it's more souvenir size. And at the Falls we're trying to bring the atmosphere of the farm there. We do the tasting of the 4 grades the way you had in the Sugar Shack. We're doing a taffy table there, an ice slab with the taffy, and we have a video of the farm playing. And our employees there have worked on the farm here. Before they go work at that store, they work on the farm for 2 weeks, help packing products. They do a few tours out here so that they can educate our consumer there. We want to make it a whole different atmosphere there than just selling syrup.
Do you find that you advertise your tours to people at the casino, I don't know, maybe international market, and some of them end up here?
Yeah, we had a lot this spring. Actually, the girls at the store were sending people here for the tour.
Okay.
Yep. So it's a little tricky right now. We're just we're still learning it, but our prices are higher there because our overhead's higher. So yeah, if somebody buys there and then comes to the farm, we're hoping they're not upset because the prices here are 50% less than there, just because of the overhead. Yeah, and it's a total different market there. That's the prices of syrup in Niagara Falls. Okay, so let's head back up to the... So this is maple syrup that we made this spring. This is the golden, the first syrup of the season. He's boiling more water out of it. And so it's coming from 67% sugar, which is maple syrup. He's taken it to about 85% sugar by removing more water. And then we're going to pour it on ice or snow. We'll pour it on snow and wrap it in a stick, and it's a great treat. It turns into a taffy. Because it's so thick, when it hits that snow, cools down, turns into taffy. Very old tradition from hundreds of years ago. Before when the first Europeans made their syrup out in the forest like this was a great treat for the kids in the spring. So the first settlers that came here from Europe and the natives that were here, they made all their sap into a hard block of sugar. So they removed almost all the water out of it, and then they made it into a block because they had no way of storing it as syrup. They didn't have the containers, and it wouldn't keep well. And then they could just break off a piece of sugar as they needed. And they also traded it that way. They would export it as a block of sugar. So what Peter has here in these cups, we have sap right from the tree. You have that container? When I mentioned that we have to process the sap immediately after we get it because there's bacteria and it will spoil. But there's companies now that are bottling it. They're putting it in Tetra Packs, they're pasteurizing it, filtering it, and it will keep for a few years. It's gotten to be known as the Canadian version of coconut water. Just a little bit sweet, has some nutrition there, great refreshing drink. If you want to do a slow cooked roast, you can pour that in there, and as it cooks off, it gets a little sweeter. But we're going to try this. Everyone can step up here and have one. The flavor comes from the cooking. So if we could remove the water out of the sap without cooking it, we would have a clear product that doesn't have maple flavor. It's the caramelizing during the cooking that goes in cooking to make this. But they're making birch syrup. They've tried walnut, oak, but the maple has that characteristic of lots of sap and lots of sugar. Our sugar was a little bit low in our sap this year because the last few summers we had quite an infestation of tent caterpillar, which ate a lot of the foliation leaves on the trees, defoliated them, so the trees couldn't produce that much sugar. So, but it's a natural pest, it's a native species, so it just runs its course. We expect that next year we shouldn't have too much problem with it. These natural pests that are native here, the cycle will build up, they'll get higher and higher population because there's no predators, and then once they get to a certain cycle, then usually a natural bacteria disease will come in and kill them all. So what we're going to do here, everybody grab a popsicle stick.
Yeah, everyone's got a popsicle stick. So I'm going to do a quick demonstration here for everybody, and then everyone's going to have a chance to roll up their own taffy stick, all right? So what I'm going to do is I take a little bit of the taffy, just like this, and I just place it on top of the snow. Once it's on top of the snow, you count 10 seconds, okay? 10 seconds is the magic number. If you wait less than that, it's going to be too runny. And if you wait more than 10 seconds, it might actually freeze up on you and you won't get on your stick. So after about 10 seconds, you just dip the end of your stick in, just like that, and you just start rolling and folding it on top of itself. Once it's all on your stick, it's going to still be a bit runny, so you just dab it back and forth in the snow a couple times just to make sure it's completely cooled off, and that also helps to completely harden it up. And then you can enjoy it. And that one will be for your tour guide Murray here.
All right.
So we'll get started
He's
over here.
sweetening me up.
We'll start over here and we'll work our way this way, and then once you have your taffy, take a couple steps back so we can get the next group in, okay?
So remember the amazing part of this, it was just made out of the sap from the tree. Nothing was added to it. All we did is cook the water out log because they didn't have metal for making pots. And they would put rocks in the fire, take the hot rock, put it in the log and keep doing that, and it would steam off that way. Very dirty product, had a lot of ash in it. But they would filter it over furs. They would clean it up by running over the furs, and the furs would collect a lot of ash on it. But they made it into sugar. So no one knows exactly how they figured out that they could do this, but the story is they saw the sap running down the side of the tree on an injury on the tree in the spring. They collected that water, they used it for making a stew, and they found it got sweeter as it cooked. So that's kind of where one of the stories of how they figured it out. So then when the Europeans came here, they were coming over on the ships. They had a lot of malnutrition and scurvy. They found that if they got maple sugar from the natives, it had so much nutrition and vitamins and minerals in it that it would cure a lot of their diseases. So everything the tree pulls out of the ground, as nutrient-wise, is in the syrup. There's 54 antioxidants, there's vitamins, there's calcium, there's manganese, there's magnesium, there's a ton of different minerals and vitamins in maple syrup. So then when the pioneers started making syrup, they had the steel pots, and they found more and more efficient ways until they came up with the evaporators, and the industry is totally evolving. Every year there's more technology and more efficient ways of boiling the sap in the syrup. Yeah, so that's the tour we do early in the spring when the sap's running. We walk through the stations, we stop at each station and tell how the people made it through history.